As of the 2020s, older aesthetics and design trends have been back in the spotlight. And no, it's not just nostalgia. The truth is that modern design is boring. The transition away from flat and minimal design is long overdue. Its reign has been stretched to the extreme, leaving us with lifeless, colorless interfaces. Even the Bauhaus school, which originally inspired minimalism, would probably disapprove. Before we jump into the tutorial, let's talk about what Frutiger Aero is, how it died, how we ended up in this flat design wasteland. Frutiger Aero was the successor to Y2K, which dominated the mid-90s to early 2000s. Y2K reflected a hopeful, tech-driven future filled with excitement and optimism about the new millennium. Frutiger Aero took the energy and grounded it, blending nature and technology in a way that felt sleek yet organic. Think glossy buttons, floating bubbles, and humanistic typefaces. It gave you the illusion that you touched grass. The name Frutiger Aero is a recent term, coined by Sophie Lee of the Consumer Aesthetics Research Institute. It referenced Windows Aero, the Glossy interface introduced in Windows Vista /7, and Adrian Frutiger, the Swiss type designer behind many humanistic typefaces that were widely used in computer interfaces. Frutiger Aero's early signs appeared in 2001 with Windows XP and Mac OS X. It gained serious traction between 2004 through 7, peaking during the 7th generation of gaming with Nintendo, Xbox, and PlayStation, embracing the glossy, eco-friendly aesthetic. Nintendo in particular was the godfather daddy of this futuristic look. By 2007 through 12, the aesthetic was everywhere, from software interfaces, tech ads, to consumer electronics. But nothing lasts forever. By 2012, Frutiger Aero was on life support. The last major example, the Wii U. I mean, if you look at this thing, it was just riddled all over the place. Apple ditched skeuomorphism for a flatter, cleaner UI, marking the official shift to the flat design era. Why did this transition happen? Frutiger Aero and Y2K before it had too much going on: glossy textures, neon highlights, 3D bevels, and gradients galore. It wasn't just an aesthetic, it was a whole visual workout. And while it looked great, it wasn't always the best for usability. In the early 2000s, designers prioritized aesthetics over functionality, which made navigating websites and interfaces clunky. By the 2010s, flatter, simpler UI made navigation easier, especially as smartphones and web design browsing became dominant. Flat design wasn't just fashionable, it was practical. It loaded faster, it was cheaper to produce, and required less power on mobile devices. Companies, of course, loved that. Furthermore, simply put, Frutiger Aero was just getting old. Flat design, for some reason, felt like progress. I remember feeling that way as a teenager. You could tell there was a desire for a clean slate after Y2K's and Frutiger's busy era. For companies, flat design was also cheaper to produce and needed less power for performance on iPhones and Androids. Rendering glossy, 3D, heavy textured buttons slowed down apps. But here's the problem: flat design went too far. It stripped away personality. Companies even started simplifying logos that were already simple, creating a trend of corporate logo slop. Now digital spaces feel cold, lifeless, and uninspired. Our relationship with technology has shifted from excitement to exhaustion. Where is the hopeful, bright future that Y2K and Frutiger Aero promised? We never knew that we were already living it back then. But design shifts are like a pendulum. Trends swim back and forth. Platforms like TikTok and Instagram have accelerated nostalgia cycles, reviving aesthetics like Y2K and Frutiger Aero. Early internet culture nostalgia, paired with new developments in AI, VR, and Web3, has sparked a renewed interest in futuristic, tech-forward aesthetics. And honestly, it makes sense. If VR's goal is to bring out the digital world to life, why not use an aesthetic and design philosophy that literally embraces humanism? Now that we've covered the history, let's break down how to actually design this aesthetic. First, we have to know what the components are that represents this timeline. Frutiger Aero is often confused with Y2K, but the key difference is higher definition visuals and a more polished modern look. Here's what defines the style: gradients and glow effect, meaning a soft lighting and a sense of depth. Skeuomorphism, UI elements that mimic real-life objects. Glossy textures, think of glass, plastic, and polished surfaces. Cloudy skies and greenery, nature meeting technology. Water bubbles and auroras, a clean, fresh, and almost utopian feel. And lastly, humanistic typefaces. What makes a humanistic typeface is the low contrast between thin and thick strokes, loose letter spacing, and wide counters. This makes them legible for small text sizes. Humanistic typefaces have a calligraphic influence to them. That means that there should be a degree of unevenness. Slanted verticals and stems are the more organic choice. There's also subgenres that we won't get into, but you can by going to the links below. Now let's create something using these principles. For the first design, it's going to be an over-the-top nostalgic piece. So it serves as something more experimental, nothing to take too seriously. Kind of serves as like maybe a magazine cover or like a social media post. So for starters, find a background. I started with a Windows 7 style green field. I use AI to expand the image and add some water. Add elements like fish, bubbles, anything that screams 2008 tech aesthetic. For the typography, I used the Frutiger typeface because what else? Added a drop shadow and then applied a 90-degree gradient overlay, half transparent white on the bottom. For the gloss effect, I have two ways. There are others and I'll link them in the video. But for the first one, use the ellipse tool, create a gradient from white to transparent, clip it to your text. You do this by control clicking your text, switching over to the shape layer and creating a clipping mask. For the second option, create a new layer, and on your new layer, create a clipping mask. With the brush tool, you'll paint over your text white, then head over to your new layer and lower the opacity. And boom, nostalgia. Okay, so I'm gonna transition to designing something more seriously on Figma. For this one, I created a fake gaming company website inspired by old Xbox designs. I used the Wayback Machine for reference and let AI generate the layout so we could only focus on purely aesthetics. I started with gradient lines that the classic Xbox era background used to have, with some space characters that represented the company's games. So I'll take you through that a little bit. Next, I did the navigation bar. To have a gradient style navigation bar on Figma, click on your shape, go to fill, then gradient. Add 4 shades from light to dark vertically. Put the second and third stops very close to the center and mess around with the opacity to your liking. You can apply this method to every element, including the text. Okay, next we're gonna add just a little bit skeuomorphism. So for the search icon, the magnifying glass, instead of having it flat, I'm gonna go on the web and search for something that looks a bit more realistic. And when I look at websites from the early 2000s, they always had borders. So I added clear section and visible borders. And there it is, Frutiger inspired website. A few more tweaks and it would feel better and straight out of 2007. For my final thoughts, flat design has overstayed its welcome. Frutiger Aero was human, hopeful, and engaging, something we desperately need in today's digital spaces. Luckily, aesthetics work in cycles, and as trends shift, we might just be on the verge of a Frutiger Aero renaissance. In the next video, I'll be tackling Y2K design, breaking down its unique elements and how it paved the way for the aesthetics that followed. Thank you for watching, and like and subscribe.